We'll see how this goes. Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. I'm going to recap here just to kind of give you an idea where we were at, so because it's been a minute. Exodus chapter 2, verse 23 through 25. The last time we were in, one of the things that we see is the king of Egypt died. And so Moses is in the desert, and it says, during those many days the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery, and cried out for help. They cried for rescue, for slavery to come up to God. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob. And God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. So one of the things that we have is this is the first time. It took 40 years for the Israelites to actually cry out to God. They were crying out to all these false gods. And that happens, right? They had spent time in Egypt. They had spent so much time in Egypt, they'd forgotten their relationship with God. And so now they finally, after 40 years, cry out to God, and God hears. And that's awesome, right? And so this is where we pick up now, in Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And so one of the things that we need to see is that we see that now Moses is a shepherd, right? And I think that's important as we study this, is like you think about all the men that God used that were shepherds. Abel was, is it too loud? Am I being too loud? Abel was the son of Adam and was a shepherd, right, and found favor with God. In Genesis chapter 4, verse 2, it says, and again she bore his brother Abel, and now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. And in course of time Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the first of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions, and the Lord had regard for Abel in his offering. So we see Abel was a shepherd. And the difference between the offerings, very easily just to get, is Cain just brought some fruit, right, of the ground. And what does Abel do? Abel gives his firstborn of his flock. It's a difference in worship, right? And so that's why he was telling them, hey, sin is crouching at your door. Because what you're doing is you're bringing this other thing. This is not what I required of you. Right? Maybe you should have gave some of that fruit to Abel, and then you could have had a sheep for slaughter or what, but that was part of it. But we see that Abel was a shepherd. We also know that Abraham had herds as well of sheep. In Genesis 21, verses 27 through 28. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham set ewes, lambs of the flock apart. Jacob as well. Jacob actually took care of was a shepherd for his uncle Laban. In Genesis chapter 30 and 31, he said, what shall I give you? And Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. And so again, we just see these shepherds. And then Joseph was a shepherd, right, taking care of his father's flocks in Genesis 37, verse 2. And these are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. And he was a boy with sons of Bilhah and Zilpah and his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. And then David, of course, was a shepherd. In 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 11, it says, then Samuel said to Jesse, are all your sons here? And he said, these remain yet the youngest, but behold, he is keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and get him, for we will not sit down till he comes here. And then we also know Amos as well. Amos, in Amos chapter 1, verse 1, the words of Amos, who was among the shepherds of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. And so we see all of these men were shepherds. And why shepherds? Right? Because sheep we went over this when we were in the book, with Philip W. Keller as we looked at the what is it? The psalmist looks at, I'm trying to remember. The name of the book now it's escaped me, but the reason why I say looking at being a shepherd is important is because if you look at Psalm 23, when David wrote it, he very bluntly says at the very beginning, "The Lord is my shepherd," right? And it says, "I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pasture. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely in goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever." And so we see, as David talks about this, as the Lord is my shepherd, it's a reminder that God provides the nourishment, the green grass, the quiet waters, the rest, right? But he also provides guidance in the paths of righteousness, and he provides protection and comfort, and as we think about the rod and the staff. And a shepherd looks at Psalm 23. That's the name of the book. It'll hit me. But we need to remember, why sheep? Well, sheep depend on their shepherd for their well-being. And so, as 40 years of being a shepherd, Moses is learning to care for the sheep. They're very sociable animals, and they travel together. But they don't like people getting in their personal space. And neither do you. Right? They don't like that. Sheep like to have their personal space. They don't like other sheep getting in there. Sometimes sheep lose connection to the flock, and they'll stray, and that leads to disaster. And they're unaware of the world's dangers. They can't defend themselves. If they fall over, sometimes they can't get back out without the help of the shepherd. They need the shepherd's help. They usually do what the other sheep do. So if one sheep goes into the water and starts to drown, they usually all start to follow the other sheep, unfortunately. But the sheep learn the sound of the voice of the shepherd. And knowing that Jesus is the good shepherd, God is the shepherd of his people. And this is, God shepherding and caring for Israel, and yet he's going to use Moses. And before Moses does anything for God, he's learning how to be a shepherd. He's learning how to protect the sheep. He's learning how to provide for the sheep. He's learning how to be present with the sheep. He's learning how to gather the sheep together and keep them in unity. And unfortunately, we know that doesn't always happen when they get together and they make a mess. But he's also guiding the sheep. And God is using this time for him as an under-shepherd to teach him. And he's teaching Moses, what it is to lead. He's trying to remove all of this worldly stuff he learned in Egypt. And this is the worst job. The Egyptians, this is the lowest position you could have as an Egyptian. They would look at a shepherd as being the worst job. And yet, he carries them through the wilderness, and he's going to learn to get Israel through the promised land. And to the promised land. He won't make it to the promised land, but Israel will. He also builds up a leader, Joshua. And so he took Jethro's advice, right? Jethro told him he can't keep this up, dude. You got to have some people come alongside you. And so eventually, what does he do? He teaches Joshua. And so we see all of that from being just a shepherd. So, we lead them there by knowing the way ourselves. Like for me as an under-shepherd, I lead you to the truth. And we open God's Word and we go through it together. And that's my job, is to feed you the Word of God, but also to be present with you. And I love that because, you can miss that little thing that Moses was a shepherd. That he kept his father-in-law Jethro's flock. the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And Horeb actually just means desert. And so now we know that Moses has spent, he's 80 years old now. We know that by looking at Acts chapter 7, verse 23. It says, when he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brothers and the children of Israel. We also know in Exodus 7:7 it says, now Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. It's been 80 years. It's been 80 years, 40 years that God's been working on him in the desert. You can think about that time, and this is one of the things I love when you think about Psalm 23, and he talks about he lays you down by the quiet streams and the quiet waters, right? And you have all that time with the sheep at night. And Moses has had all this time for 40 years with God. And God's been using these sheep. He's like, hey, this is going to be just like Israel. You just don't know yet. And so he uses that. But yet he's going to eventually send Moses to Egypt because of the suffering. In verse 2 it says, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. Now, one thing that we see here is very important to see is that the angel of the Lord is in all caps. It means Jehovah, the existing one. And so the proper name for the one true God. And it's important for us to remember that when you see the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, it's a Christophany, an appearance of Christ. That's why in John chapter 8, verse 58, it says, Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. And so it's the pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. And understand, like when you see the angel of the Lord, you don't see it in the New Testament. Why? Because Jesus came. And it's important for you to catch that little note right there, right? Because we can argue about those things, but it's like it's a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. You can see it also in Genesis chapter 14, verses 18 through 20. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and he was the priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, blessed be Abraham by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. Remember that Jesus is the great high priest. In Hebrews chapter 7, verse 1, for this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. And the king of righteousness, the king of peace. And then we also have in Exodus, we see in Exodus 13 verses 20 through 22 when we think about the glory of the Lord. And it says, and they moved on the Succoth and the encamped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness, and the Lord, all caps, went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light. And they might travel by day and by night, and the pillar of the cloud by day and the pillar of the fire by night did not depart from before the people. They had the glory of the Lord. They had the Logos. The Logos in John chapter 1 verse 1, and in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And that radiance of glory, we know that from Hebrews chapter 1 verse 3. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of His nature, and He upholds the universe by the word of His power. And after making purification for His sins, He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. When you think about the burning bush, you think about the radiance of God's glory. Right? It's the radiance of God's glory. Don't get so wrapped up on the how can a bush burn and all that stuff. It's like it's the radiance of God's glory. That's why it says take off your sandals. Right? And it's important for us to get because the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. Jesus. Jesus. And so the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning, and yet it was not consumed. Now, if you're going to write this, why would you use a bush and not a big cedar tree or something, right? He uses just the common bush in the desert. And there's bunches of them. And so he uses just a basic bush for the fire. And Moses is looking at it. He's like, it's not consuming the bush. And we think about this and you go, well, would you have had have them march around Jericho? Or would you have had them attack Jericho? Because see, that goes back to Isaiah 55 verse 8. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither your ways my ways, declares the Lord. He does things the way that we don't do them. And that's a good thing. Because when it happens, you go, that wasn't me. That was the Lord. I love that. Like that's the beauty of this, is like he doesn't use an oak tree, he doesn't use a cedar tree, he uses just a simple garden bush. A simple bush. And this is all just part of Moses' day, right? He's doing what he does as a shepherd. And now God's like, hey, this time. It's time. You're ready. And it attracts Moses. He's staring at it. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. We know in Acts chapter 7, verse 31, it says, when Moses saw it, he was amazed at the sight, and as he drew near to it, there came the voice of the Lord. So he's staring at it, he's looking at it, he's anticipating and walking around it, he's investigating. And a lot of times